Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we'll Masechtas Bava Kama Daf Ayin Dalid. We're going to begin basically in the middle of Ayin Dalid Amud Aleph, about 14 lines from the top. Omeli Rav Acha. So we were learning in yesterday's daf regarding the din of Rava, because the Gemara begins here. Omeli Rav Acha Bered Rav Ika. He said La Rav Ashi. He asked, Duka de Rava Mehecha. Where does Rava see, from the case that we saw in yesterday's daf, which I'm going to have to review in a second, how do we see that Hakashas Tchilas Hazama? What exactly is this talking about? So, Rava made an interesting statement. We have two witnesses that came, and they said that they know that a person murdered, which of course is a death penalty. And then a second group said, no, that's not true. This person did not murder. Which makes that as Eidei Hakasha. They're contradicting each other. So the din is, it's tray to tray. Typically, they just cancel each out. But then a third group came and said, no. The first group was with us. Now we typically say that a second group of witnesses who are able to say that you were with us, we apply the pasuk that the first group are Edom Zim, and they're plotting witnesses, and therefore because of that, the din is that they will end up being killed. But over here, because in the middle you had Edi Hakasha, if it cancels it out, so then the Edom Zim who subsequently come, the third kat, won't do anything. It will not cause the first group to be considered to be Edom Zayimim. However, Rava says that's not the din. He says that even though the group came as the third group, we still will listen to them, and the first group will be sentenced to death because they are plotting witnesses. Why? Because even though it was Hakasha, that Hakasha is Tchilas Hazama. Namely, because the first group said this guy murdered. The second group said no, they did not murder. Now that is similar to the third group who said you were with us, because the third group is saying there's no way that you could have watched this murder take place, and therefore there's no way you could be able to verify that this is the murderer. So that's really on some level, at least partially, what was said by the second group, because the second group also said you're wrong, but they just didn't see them in a different location. So the second group is actually somewhat as part of the process of Eidei Hazama. So therefore, we're not going to say that they cancel each other out. Now, in this, that's what the Gemara says. Where do we see this based on that which we saw yesterday? This is just such a long Gemara that I couldn't just keep going, because otherwise it would spill so much into the next daf. But it is necessary for us to understand that there was a case of an Eved Kanani. Now, an Eved Kanani, he goes free by Shein V'yayin. If the master knocks out his tooth or eye, he goes free. Now, what ended up happening, based on the Maskana, according to one opinion, is that you had two witnesses that said two things happened. The master knocked down his tooth, so he'll go free, and he blinded him. He knocked out his eye. Now, by the fact that he lost his tooth, that means he's a free man. So now the second incident of the eye, he has to pay a lot of money. The master has to pay money for the value of the eye. Now, a second group came and said the opposite. They said it's true that he should go free, but actually he should go free because he first knocked his eye out. And therefore, he should only have to pay the value of the tooth, which is obviously something in which the master is somewhat happy with, because now he doesn't have to pay the value of the tooth. He doesn't have to pay the value of the eye. He only has to pay the value of the tooth, which is much less. So in that situation, so what happened? Again, let's make sure we understand. The first group, it wanted him to pay a lot, an eye, which we'll call that $1,000. And the second group said, no, he should only have to pay $100. Now, we're going to end up seeing that based on this, there's a concept in the Gemara we're going to see in a second, that yesh b'chol masai mana, that if I say you owe 100, the other person says you owe 200, So it's, even though it sounds like we're contradicting, but we do agree on the 100. There's some partial element where we agree. It's just the second $100 is that which is our question. But we could at least agree on the 100. So it's interesting. In these two groups, one says the eye came first, one says the tooth came first. But the point is that both of them are saying he should go free. And both of them are also saying that there's some amount of money that the master has to pay. So they're both agreeing he'll have to pay 100. The question is, does he have to pay the extra 900 to make it to 1,000? So this is actually a case of Yesh B'chal Mosai Mana. So therefore, because of that, okay, let's not continue too much of a review. This was very long, so let's see the Gemara. So again, the case which I saw, which you just said, that the first group said eye, and the second group said you have to pay for the eye. The second group said you have to pay for the tooth. So Reisha Mikam Mischakshe Mitzioi. Are we really finding a hakasha regarding the middle one? Now the middle group, Kivan De'ilo Mitzmi. If the first group didn't become Edom Zaymin Sahadusa Kavasayu Kam Kaima, then we would have listened to the Eidos. The Dida Kavasayu Paskinan, because we're going to again Paskin, Desh B'chal Masai Mana. So therefore, the first group, it's true, they said you have to pay the value of an eye. But both of them are really saying that there is some type of money. So it's not an absolute hakash over here. In fact, Hilkach kamoihu de kamischachshi metzia lo mischachshi midi. So what ended up happening is that the second group who says you only owe 100, so the first group is not contradicting the second group, because the second group says you owe $1,000. The first group says you owe $100. So even the one who says you owe 1,000, there is $100 within the 1,000. Again, I'd same idea as Yesh B'chal Mosai Mana. I don't want to say it's 200 because an eye's got to be a lot more than just double losing a tooth. It's my guess. But the same idea, the same concept applies. The second group that says you only owe $100 for the value of the tooth. The first group isn't really contradicting them. So it's not really an element of seeing absolute hakasha, and then, like for example, you murdered, this guy murdered, the other one says, no, this guy didn't murder. So they're absolutely not agreeing whatsoever. So that is a much harder establishment to say that we would then listen to Edom Zayman. Over here, there's some element where their testimony agrees. So Amalei Rava Savar Midrasha Shabashosh Kito Seifa Nabashosh. There's actually the Seifa is also with three groups. V'dayik Meseifa. Could go into also Beitrei, two people came, V'amri Hipul Ashina V'simes Ifsina Einai. Upaskine Ladina Opumaihu. So if you only have one group of witnesses, so obviously we're going to listen to them, two witnesses, and they first said his tooth, and then they said the eye. Okay? So which means that he's requiring the master to pay the value of an eye, which is a lot of money. The Osube Tre Achrine, and then another group said the army simes Eino Vihipul Ashinoi. Right? That first he did the eye and then the tooth. The Kamach Shilhu Lahani Kamoi, Benimsa Zayman Kamoi, Mishalman Deme Ayin Lorav. So if the first group ends up becoming Edom Zayman, they have to pay the value of the eye, because he's going to go free, so he doesn't have to pay for a full master, for the full eved. He's going to go free based on either of the testimonies. But the first group will have to pay the difference between the value of an eye and a tooth, which we're just keeping it simple, is Misham Demi Ayin Larav. Why should the first group have to pay for the eye? There's a contradiction, there's a chash at the very beginning, because they're saying an eye, and then the second group is saying that it's a tooth. So in that situation, again, we have Edi Hachasha. Therefore, we see Taka that it's Techilas Hachasha, even though it's absolute Hachasha here, still the din is that it's still Hazama will work. Therefore, he still has to pay for the value of the eye. The Vabai Armelach Bishal Maray Shol Sagadol Shosh Kitos. Shari Katani Rav Omer came. When it came to the first case, where it says Harav Oimer Kain, it means the master's happy about it. What's the master happy about? He's happy that instead of him having to pay for the value of the eye, he only has to pay for the value of the tooth. So, since, again, if it's only 2 Kita Edim, just 2, and the first kat says Edus, and the master is happy with this, that can't make sense, because this first kat is freeing him. The Adon isn't happy, so the ratio must be with 3 groups. And the second kat is saying the Adon only needs to pay for the tooth and the eye. So that's what he's happy about. Because if it only there's 2 groups, and therefore the Rav's happy, he's not happy based on the testimony of the first group. Because before the first group came, he still had his Evid. The first group is saying you are no longer having this Evid Kanaini. He's going free. Nothing good about that. That's why we had to say in the Resha that it has to be talking about there was 3 groups. And therefore, again, what happened was the Rav is the master's happy about the second testimony. The second testimony is saying, okay, he already knows he's going to go free, but he's happy that now instead of him having to pay the value of the eye, he only has to pay the value of the tooth. How do we know necessarily that the Seifa has to be 3 kitos? Shahari Evid Omer Kain. Evid Koldahu Meimar Omer Nichale the Nepal Gacheros. So the Seifa is that instead of him having to pay to get the money for a tooth, the Evid would get the value for the eye, which is much more money. But the truth is, he's going to be happy either way, right? He's going to be happy even if it's just 1 kat. The Evid is happy that he's going free. So you don't have to force ourselves to have to say that we're talking about a case of 3 kitos. And therefore, Labdavka, according to Abaye, do we need to say, and this is how he explained it over on the very last line on Amud Beis previously, Davchinu Vazminu. That's what ended up happening. Okay. So Ella safe. So that's that. So Masker Ramzera. So Ema safe. Ema. So when you say Simas Einoi, if you knock out the tooth, this is just a simple question. If you knock out the tooth, we know that he goes free. Nepuk Einoi Ein Dalamad Beis Hipol Shinoi Nepuk. Let me read that again. Why don't we say Simas Einoi Nipik? Be'eno, he goes free with the eye. Hipol Shinoi, you go free if you knock on his tooth. Nepuk B'Shinoi, he goes free with the tooth. Simas Einoi Hipol Shinoi Nepuk Be'eno B'Shinoi. How do we know that if he does both actions, that you have to pay for one of them? Maybe it's saying that if you knock out his eye, he goes free. Knock out his tooth, he goes free. But maybe if you do both, he's still just going to go free. You don't have to pay him at all. This is just a stam basic question of understanding the din, of why do you have to pay for a second action. It says he goes free because of the eye. And the way that you can push to say, the question is, did it happen b'vasachas? That must be the way you're going to frame the question, because b'zachar zeh, so then it's hard to even understand, because if he already went free because of the tooth, then obviously you should have to pay for the eye because he's a ben chayir and he's free. So maybe this is talking about a case of b'zachar zeh. I'm the mefarshim on that. Okay, so Omer Rav Idi Baravin Afana Namitaninam. I also have support to this, as it says as follows: Ganav al pi shnayim. So what happened? We mentioned that someone stole, and there's 2 witnesses to verify it. Obviously, you have to pay kefil. But tavach al pihem, and those same people testify that he sold or slaughtered this animal, in which they're basically saying you have to pay dal v'hei, you have to pay the 4 and 5, depending if it's a shor set. So v'nimsa zayman, and it turns out the first group are edim zayman. So it says misham is a kol. They have to pay all 4 and 5, which in itself, just on its face, seems like it's not much of a chiddush. We obviously know that there is a din of kasher zamam, that there's a chiyuv to pay. The plotting witnesses must pay for whatever they plotted to do. So my love, it must be dehidu al gneva. They first testified that he stole, and therefore he should be chayv kefil. V'chaz vehidu al tvicha, and then afterwards they gave a second testimony that he shechted. V'huzmu al gneva, and then you have a second group that came and said that's not possible. You were with us when it was stolen. That the time you said it was stolen by him. V'chaz v'huzmu al tvicha. So the truth is, if you understand it this way, the second that the Inim Zayman were considered to be plotting witnesses regarding the stealing, which is again the second kat's first testimony. So therefore, when it comes to the tvicha, that's already considered somewhat of an element of hakasha, because once they became edim zaymin, so therefore that was like discounted the fact that they stole. So now you're talking about tvicha, so they're basically saying it can't be that they did the tvicha. So this was before the second kat even said they were plot edim zaymin regarding the tvicha. But even before that, we should say that it's considered like edi hakasha. As soon as they testify, no, there's no way you saw them steal because you're with us. So therefore, the tvicha means nothing. So therefore, there's at the very least contradicting the chiyuv of having this person to have to pay dalad v'hei. Nonetheless, you still have to pay everything. So if this element before again the second kat gave the second testimony, if we would say hachash is not chilsa zama, atvicha my mishalmin, you shouldn't have to pay at all. Very interesting. It must be by virtue of the fact that we say they still have to pay dalad v'hei. Why do they have to pay dalad v'hei? These plotting witnesses, because the second group, even though it's true when they first testified and said imanu hayisim about the geneva. So that makes it hakasha for the tvicha. So if you would say that hakasha is left chilsa zama, so then the din would be that you would not have to pay for the tvicha because it's a hakasha, and therefore edim zayim who subsequently come and testify would be thrown out. So why did they pay dalad v'hei? Because we say hakasha is chilsa zama, which you can maybe for and say these are the same edim. In the Gemara we saw before, there was 3 different kita edim. So maybe something to think about. There's a chiluk. Maybe the only time we could say hachashat chilsa zama is like in a case like this, where it's the same group of witnesses, but they're testifying, one after the other, not exactly at the same moment. It's not talking to Dibur, but it's the same group of witnesses. So you can maybe say it makes sense as far as hachashat chilsa zama, but not in the case where it's 3. Okay, something to think about. The Gemara says a different shot. Amri no hachmei skin kigan shehuzma tvicha tchila. What happened was they were muslim on the tvicha first, so therefore that was the hazama, and then the hazama afterwards was on the geneva. Uplukta edim shehuchshu b'soiv huzmu, and the machlokas of edim that gave hachasha, then hazama. Rav Yochanan Rabbi Lezer chadam in haragim v'chadam ein haragim. This time Rabbi Lezer who the oimer ein haragim, they're not killed. Rabbi Lezer edim shehuchshu b'nefesh loikin. Rabbi Lezer says that they get malchus. Now, that they get killed, am I loikin? So, what do you mean you give them malchus? So, again, we give malchus in a situation where, there's no proper edim, a hasra, and everything. So, havile lav shenit las horis misas bastin. So, even though, okay, fine, we can't kill these people, but because they clearly violated the law in which there would be azhar of misas bastin, the azhar is you will be killed by bastin. So the din is the whole lav shenita l'soros misas bastin like it all. We don't give malchus on such a thing. So why would he then say you give malchus? Because it must be, according to him, it's not considered to be a lav, which is shenita l'soros misas bastin, because ein haragin a lav, because he holds hachash is not tchilas hazama. Now lav shemamin or belezu the ermin haragin to stayim. So that's actually good proof. Now loikin, we say we give the malchus. Why? Why would you give malchus in this case? Trey train in who there's 2 going against the other 2. Why do you rely on this? Rely on them. Who says that the second group is better than the first? Edi hazama, it's a chiddush, that's the din. But when it comes to any hachasha, we say my chas is the samcha sahani. Why should you rely on the second? Rely on the first. So why would you give this guy malchus because of it? So Rabbi b'baharg baraglov. It happens to be that who comes strolling into the court, says Rashi, Oso she'amar lav shehu nerag, b'chai baragla fanenu. Okay, we don't believe in what I don't want to say. So, right, this is not talking about any unusual circumstances like of a tchesa mesim over here, which of course we do believe in tchesa mesim, but in its time. But the reality is, if this person walks into court, the one who says, "Oh, this guy was murdered," so obviously this guy wasn't murdered because he's right here. So based on that, it's clear that somebody is lying. The one who says that the guy was killed. Okay. Okay, let's look at a couple questions. Question 13. Ganav al pi shnayim v'tavach ha'machar al pihem. V'nimsa zayim mishalmanas hakol. So le'eza man di omer sarach lo'im edamari davkik shidu al hakol b'vasachas. Okay, there you go. Then it has to be that the testimony was at the same time. Le'eza man di omer sarach lo'im edamari davkik kishahuzma al tficha koidim. That the tficha had to be done first. So, this as we said. According to, this is actually interesting because this is reminds of a sugya before. If you hold that you become pasul mafreya, then everything had to have been done b'vasachas, as we said, tachadei dibur, etc. That's actually not really from this sugya, but it's from before. The one who says achash is lav tchilas hazama, he has to say that you were first mazim on the tficha first, because otherwise, if you're mazim on the geneva, so then on the tficha it's hachasha, and therefore must be, the fact you have to pay must be because of hachasha's tchilas hazama. So therefore, if he says no, that's not the case, it's first there are mazim on the tficha, then on the geneva. Again, even though just the push reading of the Gemara, you would maybe think that there's no nafkamina, which really is why it's more supportive, the hachashas tchilas hazama. Question 14. Eidim shehuchashu b'nefesh. You have witnesses that contradict. This guy murdered, this guy says no, he didn't murder. Kagoin shiba harg baragla, and the guy actually who was supposed to be dead walks in the court. My tam demand ein loikin. Why would you hold Yonkim Malkus? Because he holds hachashas tchilas hazama, and therefore, if let's say witnesses come afterwards, and the first group would become Eidim Zayman, and therefore that's considered to be a love Shenitan las horas misas based in, and love Shenitan las horas misas based in, as we said, is ein loikin a love. Okay, so now let's continue looking at some questions. TA2 Masab Rabbi Gamliel Shesimas ein tavi avdoi. Okay. Question TB3. Eidim shehuchashu b'nefesh k'goyin sheba harg barago my tam demadem in loikin or lavshni the Mrs. Space and in the loikin, which is ayin dalim with bays, which is the same question as question 14. TB3. Okay. And we have a lot of Rabbi Gibber's questions. We'll get to that. We'll do that at the very end. Let's see the next Mishnah. It says the Mastis Ganaval Pishnayim. Yeah. So again, you have witnesses that say you stole. So based on that, this person will have to be careful. However, there's only one witness that the person shechted or sold, which of course that would not be enough. Oh, al piatzmo, or let's say the person is moida. We know moida b'kanas is potter, and therefore mishalom tashom kefel, because that testimony stands on the gneva. V'ena mishalom tashom midal b'hei, which again is not much of a chiddush. We know if you're moida b'kanas, you're potter, and one witness is not enough to make the person pay. Next case, ganav v'tavach b'Shabbos. We had this sugi before. A person stole and shechted on Shabbos, in which there's an iser dioraisa of shechting on Shabbos, and because of that, we're going to see he's going to be potter from dalad v'hei, from the tficha, because he's chayiv b'nafshay, because he's chayiv misa from Michal Shabbos. Continuing, ganav v'tavach l'avodah zara. Similarly, if a person stole and shechted for avodah zara, we'll see he's also going to be potter from dalad v'hei. Ganav mishel aviv v'meis aviv. Let's say he stole from his father, then his father died, in which at that point he should be yirish his possessions of his father. So too bad the guy shouldn't have stolen to begin with. So he is a ganav for stealing, but again, ve'achach tavach u'machar. Then afterwards he stole. After his father died, he shechted or sold. So at that point it's really his. So he shouldn't have to pay dal v'hei. Ganav hikdish ve'achach tavach u'machar. Again, if let's say you steal and then you're makdish something, in which the din is when you shecht something which is hektish, it's not yours. It doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to hektish. So in all these cases, again, you don't pay the dal v'hei. Rav Shimon says, the Gemara is going to explain hey on what he's talking about, what part of the Mishnah. Kedashim shechai b'acharusam misham tashim adal v'hei shechai b'acharusam potter. So if you have kachim which are chai b'acharayas, namely usually like a neder, you say hariyalai, which means you're putting upon yourself, which means if the animal gets lost or stolen, then you have to replace it, which means you're chai b'acharusam. So if it comes to that, so the din is that you're going to have to pay because there is an element that it's still like yours. However, if it's kodshim in which you're not chayav b'achrayas, for example, like in a dove you say or zoo, so it's on this animal, and if this animal gets lost or stolen, okay, I don't have any more of a chiyuv, so therefore you're going to be potter. Again, the Gemara is going to explain this at better length. Says Gemara, al pi eid echad pshita. One witness, obviously. What's the question? Of course, one witness you're not going to be chayav dal b'hei. The reason why we mention the two together is to compare them. When you have one witness, if another witness comes into court a little bit later, they are mitzdaref, even though they didn't testify at the exact same moment. Still, those 1 + 1 = 2. So the chiddush is that even you're a moed b'kanas, and usually moed b'kanas potter, what happens if witnesses come afterwards? You'll be chayiv. And that's lefukim and Rav Huna oim Rav. Yom Rav Huna oim Rav, moed b'kanas v'achar b'oedim potter. So it's a machlokus, whether or not, as we saw before, that once you're moed b'kanas and witnesses come afterwards, are you chayiv or potter? So this is telling me to tell you that it's dumi to piyed echad, and therefore you're going to be chayiv. Gufa. Getting back to what we said before. Om Rav Huna oim Rav, moed b'kanas v'achar b'oedim potter. So Eisvei Rav Chisda Rav Huna. So he asked a question, according to Rav Huna, that even though witnesses come, but since you're a moed b'kanas, you're going to be potter. Is that true? Maaseh Rabbi Gamliel. Finally, we got to the story of Rabbi Gamliel. Shesimis ein tavi abdoi. This Nebuch, this one of the biggest tzaddikim in the world, tavi abdoi, where he's hung out with him in a sukkah, and when he died, the Gemara in Brachos says he said tanchumim for him because he was a kosher hoya. So the Gemara actually says that Rabbi Gamliel blinded his eye. He was very, very happy. Obviously, he wasn't happy that he hurt him. It was not something which he intended to do. Says Rash Lefisha Eved Kosher Hoya. He was a great man, a great Eved. He wanted to free him. Ella Shahamashachar Abdul Iver Basay. He never did it because he violated an asay. So he would have loved to have freed him, but he's not. Rabbi Gamliel's not going to do any aveira. But unfortunately, there was a terrible incident, and Rabbi Gamliel's Eved Tavi Avdai lost his eye. So he wasn't happy again. He lost his eye. He was happy finally his Eved can go free. Matzah Rabbi Yeshua Amalo Iyata Maidah Shetavi Avdi Yatzel Cheres. Don't you agree that he should go free? Amalo Lama Why Amalei Shasi. Mesias Eno, I blinded his eye, and that's Beferish Psukim the Torah. Armulo Ein B'Varacha Klum. Your words mean nothing. Shikvar Ein Lo Edim. There's no witnesses. There was no eyewitnesses, no pun intended, to have seen you do this. Mashma, and therefore, what are you doing? You're in Moed B'Knas. You're in Moed B'Knas' potter, because as expensive as an eye is, it's not the value of the entirety of this person that you own. And therefore, the fact that you go free because you knocked out an eye or a tooth, that's kanas. That's not din mammon. And therefore, moed b'kanas potter. Hayeshel edim chayiv. So it's an interesting vart. According to this, pashit, if you have an Evan, you knock out his eye, and there's no witnesses, and you're immediately a moed b'kanas, you're potter, you got to keep your slave. Hayeshel edim chayiv. However, let's say there are witnesses around. You're chayiv. In other words, even though, says Rashi, also baser hoida, even though you admitted you were moed b'kanas v'achach bo'edim is chayiv. V'shamin imenu moed b'kanas v'achach bo'edim chayiv. So we see actually it's a kasha on you, on the kasha of Rav Huna. So Amalei no shana regamliel delay b'fnei beis din oidi. The reason, if you were moed in front of beis din, that's moed b'kanas v'achach bo'edim, I will hold your potter. So the reason why he's going to be chayiv in this situation is because it's not really being moed b'kanas. You have to be moed b'kanas not just to some person in a supermarket. You have to do it in front of a beis din, b'fnei beis din. Rabbi Yeshua beis din havi. What do you mean? Rabbi Yeshua was not beis din, so he obviously was done right with a beis din. Rabbi Yeshua, Ayin Ham and Off. Yeah, that's true. Rabbi Yeshua was an av beis din, but Shlo beis din havi. It doesn't mean they were actually in a beis din at the time. Vasanya Armelo in B'Varacha Klum Shkvar Hodesa. It says you already admitted. Now it says Rashi Mashma feel also Adam Basar Hachi Potter. That's Mashma that even if witnesses come afterwards, you're Potter. It sounds like Moed B'Knas V'Achar Bo'edim is Potter. My love Tanoihi Hi Tanas the Aimer Shikvar in Edim, the one who says the language of you have no witnesses, Savar Madam Kanasmak Edim is Chayiv. It's just because there's no witnesses, and the witnesses should be Chayiv. But Hi Tan the Aimer Shikvar Hodesa, you've already admitted to it. It's mashma. Anything that happens afterwards is not going to matter. Savar Madam Kanasmak Edim Potter. Lo, the Kulayam Madam Kanasmak Edim Potter. Everyone holds that he's going to be Potter. The machlokus between these two languages is Haitana Diarmishkvar Inocha Edim. Right now, you don't have witnesses to say this. Savar Chutzl Basin Havi. We held that this case was taking place outside of Basin, and therefore once witnesses come, you'll be chayiv, or in this case, you will free him. The one who says that you've already admitted in Basin, even though normally we would say, again, let me frame the second half first. Everyone holds that if witnesses come afterwards, you're potter. So the question is, if you're modeh b'kanas in Basin, so that's really being modeh b'kanas, and therefore, if witnesses come afterwards, you're potter. However, in the other language, is talking about where he was not really modeh b'kanas, even though he said it, but it was not in front of Beis Din. And since it was not in Beis Din, witnesses could come to free Tavi Avdoi. Okay, we're going to stop there, and let's now finally see TA2. Masenberg Gamliel Shasimas ein Tavi Avdoi, ein B'bracha Klum Shekvar ein Lo Edim. Right now, there are no witnesses. Madua im Hoy Edim. Why, if there are witnesses, Yatzal Acheres, when if there are Gamliel B'Hoidah? Why would he? How does that work? So Pashit is because Modeh B'Kanas Moedim is Chayev, or because he was Moedah Chutz Le Beis Din. So that is the answer to 2B2, which I think is the same as question 1. Let's see over here. Exactly the same question. So it's really question 1, and let's see how Dirshu writes it up. Chosel Basin Havi or Kivan the Potter Atzma Maklum Havi Moida Rav the Imba Edom Chayv. Okay, so a little bit of different language. Okay, TB 4. Mahasvarul Chalik Bein Moida Begneva V'Achach Ba Edom De Potter LeBein De Moida Betfich V'Achach Ba Edom. Okay, I don't think we did that yet. Let's look at some of Rabbi Gibber's questions over here. Let's see. All right, let's start off over here. Question 8. Kishahu Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yeshua, Simo es ein Tavi Avdo, Tani Chada, Shem Yeshua Hishivlo, ein B'Recha Klom, Shkvar ein Lo Edim. Another one says Shekvar Hodesa. What's the chiluk between these two brises? One is what I wrote. One is Modeh B'Kanas V'Achal Edim Potter, and the other brisa Lashon holds Modeh B'Kanas V'Achal Edim Chayiv. No, really, everyone holds Modeh B'Kanas V'Achal Edim is Potter. One Lashon he was Modeh is in Beis Din. The other he was outside of Beis Din. That was question 8. Let's go and see a couple more questions. Question 5, 6, and 7. Why not? Shnaim shehidu sharav shehipol es avdoi. First he knocked on his tooth, then his eye. Another group came, that was the eye, then the tooth. Then a third group comes. Hakat habez lashon demei ayin le'eved. Okay. Lama ein lehevi rayim mikan hachash dechilas azamal maskanas hagemara. So again, the way I may have said it, this was actually on the second kat. There is no hachash on the second group, since we hold yesh b'chal masayim mana. So we'd only be chayiv the rav to pay a tooth. Heichzir Rabbi be'edim shochashu b'ma she'idu sheruvin harg shimon be'loikin v'hai trein who the dead man walked into din, so he wasn't killed to start with. Ezariah maybe Hagamar Rabbi Lezer the spherule hachash Me'ezariah maybe Hagamar Rabbi Lezer hanal. Okay, hachashal atchios azama adka.